Hey everyone, tonight's story is one that I believe will stay with you long after you close your eyes. It's not just a tale, it's a reflection of life itself. Imagine this: in a small, forgotten town of old America, there lived a man whose only duty was to keep a single lantern burning every night. To many, it was just a job. But to those who truly looked closer, that light carried meaning, hope, guidance, and a reminder that even in the darkest hours, one small flame can change everything. Before we begin, I'd love for you to share in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Maybe you're in a quiet room, maybe you're resting after a long day, maybe you're thousands of miles away, but right now, in this moment, we're connected. So, turn down your lights, let go of today's worries, and drift with me into this gentle story. The town of Millbrook rested quietly between rolling hills and silver rivers. A place that might never appear on a grand map, but lived deeply in the hearts of those who called it home. The streets were lined with cobblestones, worn smooth by the footsteps of generations, and the air smelled faintly of pine carried down from the northern woods. Every evening, as the sun melted into a horizon of amber and violet, a man known simply as the Lantern Keeper would appear. His real name was Elias, though few bothered to call him that anymore. To the townsfolk, he was the one who made sure that the great iron lantern, standing proudly in the center square, never dimmed. The lantern itself wasn't ordinary. It had been there longer than most could remember, forged in the earliest days of the town. Its flame was said to be special, a light that once guided lost travelers, saved wagons from tumbling into the river bends, and comforted children on nights when the winds howled like wild beasts. It wasn't magic, at least not in the way stories of sorcery tell it, but it carried the magic of tradition, the weight of meaning, the strength of human hands that cared enough to keep it alive. Elias had inherited this duty from his father, who inherited it from his own. For 3 generations, the lantern never failed, not once. And so Elias carried on, though his hair had turned silver and his hands grew stiff from years of work. His steps were slow now, his back bent, but each night he made the same steady walk to the lantern tower, climbed the narrow spiral staircase, and, with gentle patience, fueled the flame. Children often followed him, curious about his ways. They would watch from a distance as the fire came alive, flickering and dancing against the black canvas of night. To them, it was a simple wonder, but to Elias, it was life's purpose. One such child, however, was not content to simply watch. His name was Samuel, a boy of 12, with curious eyes and a restless heart. Samuel dreamed of adventure, of journeys beyond Millbrook, but he also felt something whenever he saw the lantern's glow. He couldn't explain it, just that it seemed to whisper to him, as if calling out with stories of its own. One evening, as Elias finished his duty and locked the small gate at the base of the lantern tower, Samuel gathered his courage. "Sir," he said, his voice small against the vast night. Elias turned, his face creased like parchment, but his eyes soft. "Yes, boy. Why do you do it every night?" "I mean, it's just a lantern. People have lamps in their homes, they have candles. Why does this one matter so much?" Elias looked at him for a long moment. Most adults dismissed children's questions, but Elias believed every question held weight. He crouched slowly, resting his worn hands on his knees. "Because, Samuel," he said, "light is not just for seeing. Light is for believing. It tells people they're not alone, and sometimes that is the greatest gift one can give." Samuel frowned, tilting his head. But couldn't someone else do it? Doesn't it get tiring? A chuckle rose from Elias's chest. Ah, but that is the lesson. Anyone could do it. But the question is, who will? Those words stuck in Samuel's mind like seeds planted in soil. He thought of them even as he lay in bed that night, listening to the lantern's faint glow filtering through his window. The days passed, and Samuel began to notice more. He saw how travelers entering Millbrook would pause at the lantern with relief, as though it marked safety. He saw how townsfolk, returning late, glanced up at it with comfort. And he saw how Elias, though old and weary, never once failed in his task. But as winter drew near, storms began to sweep across the land. The winds grew sharp, carrying icy rain that battered rooftops. One night, a storm so fierce came that even the bravest villagers bolted their doors. Lightning clawed across the sky, thunder growled like giants, and rain came down in endless sheets. Samuel, peering through the cracks of his shutters, wondered if Elias would still come. Surely not, he thought. No one would walk through this storm for a lantern. And yet, through the downpour, he saw a figure. Elias, clutching his cloak tight, made the slow trek to the lantern tower. His lantern flame sputtered in the rain, but he shielded it with his hands, determined to reach the great iron beacon. Samuel's breath caught in his chest. For the first time, he understood. This wasn't just about a light. It was about duty, sacrifice, and the quiet kind of courage that didn't ask for applause. The next morning, when the storm passed and the streets glistened with puddles, the lantern still burned. Its flame had not faltered. Samuel sought Elias out again. "I saw you last night," he confessed, "in the storm." "You still went." Elias nodded, his expression calm, though his eyes showed the toll of the night. Storm or no storm, the flame must burn, because there is always someone out there searching for it. Samuel swallowed hard. He felt a stirring inside him, a question he wasn't ready to answer yet. Could he be the one, someday, to carry that burden? As weeks turned into months, Samuel grew closer to Elias. He began helping in small ways, carrying the oil can, polishing the lantern glass, even clearing the snow from the path to the tower. He asked questions constantly, and Elias, patient as the river, always answered. One cold evening, as snowflakes fell like feathers from the sky, Elias handed Samuel the long brass lighter. "Would you like to try tonight?" he asked gently. Samuel's eyes widened. "Me? Yes, you." Every keeper begins with a first flame. With trembling hands, Samuel climbed the stairs. His heart thudded as he lit the great lantern, watching the fire leap to life. For a moment, he felt as though the world itself held its breath. Down below, Elias smiled. "There, do you see? It's not just light, it's a promise." Samuel beamed with pride. But beneath that pride was a new weta sense that this was no ordinary task. But fate has a way of testing promises. One night, as spring thawed the snow and the river roared with melted ice, a stranger came to Millbrook, cloaked in shadows, with eyes that flickered like restless fire. He paused beneath the lantern. Samuel, standing nearby, felt uneasy. The man looked up at the flame and sneered. "Strange, isn't it? How people cling to light as if it can protect them." Samuel frowned. "It does protect us. It guides us." The stranger chuckled darkly. "Or perhaps it blinds you from the truth. What happens when the light goes out, boy? What then?" Before Samuel could answer, Elias appeared, his voice firm. "Enough. The flame will not go out. Not while I draw breath." The The stranger's gaze lingered on Elias, then shifted to Samuel. His smile was thin and unsettling. "We shall see." And with that, he melted back into the shadows. That night, Samuel could not sleep. For the first time, he feared for the flame, not from storms or winds, but from something darker, something human. Cliffhanger ending for part 1. Days later, Elias fell ill. His strength waned, his hands shook, and for the first time in decades, he could not climb the lantern tower. The townsfolk whispered in worry. The flame still burned, but who would tend it now? Samuel stood outside the tower, the brass lighter heavy in his hand. Elias's words echoed in his mind. Anyone could do it, but who will? And just as he gathered his courage, he noticed a figure lurking near the square, the same stranger, watching silently as the lantern flickered against the night. Samuel's breath quickened. The responsibility was his now, but was he ready? Samuel stood at the base of the lantern tower, the brass lighter clutched tightly in his hand. His breath was uneven, each inhale sharp in the cold night air. The flame above still burned, but faintly, like a tired heart struggling to keep its rhythm. Behind him, in the shadows of the square, the stranger lingered. His presence was silent, yet heavy like a storm cloud waiting to break. The man's eyes gleamed, as though he delighted in the boy's hesitation. Samuel's chest tightened. Elias was not there to guide him, not tonight. The townsfolk had retreated to their homes, their faith resting on a boy whose hands still trembled with inexperience. For a long moment, Samuel considered stepping back, returning home, pretending the lantern would somehow tend itself. But Elias's words returned like a whisper carried on the wind. Anyone could do it, but who will? With a deep breath, Samuel turned toward the tower door. The old iron hinges groaned as he pushed it open. The staircase loomed before him, a spiral of wood and shadow. His legs felt heavy, but he climbed, step by step, oil can in one arm, lighter in the other. The climb seemed endless, his heart pounding louder with each turn. At the top, he reached the lantern chamber. The glass panes rattled in the night wind. The flame, weak but alive, waited for him. Samuel knelt beside it, refueled the basin with careful hands, trimmed the wick as Elias had taught him, and brought the lighter close. A spark leaped, then a steady flame roared to life, casting golden light across the room. Samuel's chest swelled with relief. The flame was strong again. He had done it. But as he turned to look out the window, he froze. The stranger stood in the square below, still watching. He did not clap or jeer, he only smiled, thin and unsettling, before disappearing into the alleys. The following days were a blur of responsibility. Samuel rose before dawn, carried oil through the streets, and climbed the tower each evening. He polished the glass, tended the flame, and kept the light alive. Yet, with every night, the stranger returned, always at a distance, always silent, his presence a shadow Samuel could not ignore. Doubt began to creep into the boy's heart. Was the flame truly enough to protect the town? Could a single lantern matter in a world so vast and dark? One night, unable to contain his unease, Samuel visited Elias. The old man lay pale, his breaths shallow, but his eyes remained clear. "Elias," Samuel whispered, sitting at his bedside. "I've been tending the flame, but I don't know if I'm strong enough. The people doubt me. And there's a man who says the flame will die no matter what I do." Elias reached weakly for Samuel's hand. His grip was frail, yet steady. "Listen to me, boy. A flame does not fight darkness by force. It wins simply by existing. You are not asked to outshine the night to, are asked only to keep shining. Samuel blinked back tears. But what if I fail? Elias's voice softened, yet carried weight. Failure is only in not trying. Even if the flame falters, even if storms come, even if shadows whisper. As long as you rise to tend it, the light will never truly die. The boy sat in silence, those words sinking deep into his heart. The stranger grew bolder. Some nights he approached townsfolk, telling them the flame was meaningless. Why rely on a lantern? He sneered, to a gathering in the square. You have your own lamps, your own hearths. This boy wastes his strength on a light that will one day go out. Would it not be better to let it die now and see how strong you truly are without it? His words sowed unease. Some nodded reluctantly, others shook their heads in defiance. But Samuel heard of these whispers, and each one felt like a stone added to his burden. The test came on a night of great storm. The winds howled through Millbrook, tearing shingles from rooftops. Rain hammered the streets in torrents. Lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the earth. Samuel clutched the oil can and lighter to his chest as he ran toward the tower. The storm pushed him back, soaking him to the bone, but he pressed on. At the base of the stairs, he glanced toward the square. Of course, the stranger stood, untouched by the storm, his smile mocking. Samuel forced himself to climb. Step after step, he slipped, stumbled, and rose again. At the top, he found the flame nearly gone, flickering weakly. His heart leaped in panic. No, no, stay with me, he whispered, rushing to refill the basin. His hands shook as he shielded the lighter from the wind that leaked through the tower cracks. He struck once, twice the flame sparked and caught. At last, the lantern blazed again, casting its golden glow over the town. Samuel collapsed beside it, exhausted but victorious. When he looked out the window, the stranger was gone. But victory came with cost. Samuel's body ached, his hands blistered from the lighter, his clothes still damp from the storm. Night after night, the toll grew heavier. Yet with each climb, he found something new inside himself. Quiet strength, a courage that did not shout but endured. One evening, as he polished the lantern glass, a little girl from the town called up to him. "Thank you," she cried, her small voice carrying across the square. "I was afraid of the dark last night, but I saw the light and I wasn't scared anymore." Samuel froze, his throat tightening. That one voice, so pure, reminded him why he climbed, why he kept the flame alive. It wasn't about storms or strangers. It was about the hearts that depended on the light, even when they never said it aloud. Spring blossomed, and Elias grew weaker still. Samuel visited often, telling him of each night's duty. Elias would listen with faint smiles, his pride unspoken but deep. One evening, as Samuel prepared to leave, Elias spoke softly. "Samuel, the lantern is not just mine or yours. It belongs to the people. But you have proven yourself worthy. Promise me, no matter what shadows may say, you will keep tending the flame." Samuel's eyes filled with tears. He nodded. "I promise." Elias closed his eyes, and his chest rose and fell slowly. "Then the light will never die." That night, Elias passed away, his spirit as calm as the flame he had guarded his whole life. The town mourned, draping black cloth over doors and filling the square with silence. But when evening came, all eyes turned upward. The lantern still burned, and beside it, Samuel stood. The stranger returned one last time, stepping into the silent square, his voice carried in the heavy air. So the old keeper is gone, and a boy holds his place. Tell me, Samuel, do you truly believe you can keep this flame forever? You will grow weary, you will falter. The night is endless, and one day it will claim the light. Samuel looked down from the tower, his voice steady though his heart beat fast. You're right. One day my hands may fail. One day my body may grow too old. But the flame does not depend only on me. It depends on all who choose to keep it alive. And as long as there is even one person willing to carry it forward, the light will never belong to the night. The stranger's smile faltered. His eyes, once gleaming, dimmed. He turned without another word and vanished into the darkness, never to be seen again. Years passed. Samuel grew from boy to young man, his shoulders strong from climbing the tower, his heart steady from years of tending the flame. The townsfolk no longer doubted him, they trusted him, depended on him, admired him. And one day, as he stood before a group of curious children at the base of the tower, he handed the brass lighter to one of them. "Would you like to try tonight?" he asked, with the same gentle tone Elias had once used with him. The child's eyes widened with wonder, and Samuel smiled. He understood now. The flame was never meant to belong to one keeper forever. It was meant to be passed from hand to hand, heart to heart, across generations. And so the lantern of Millbrook burned on, not as a single flame, but as a legacy of light, courage, and quiet hope. For even in the darkest night, one small light could guide the way. Moral: even the smallest light, when cared for, can outlast storms, shadows, and time itself. Because the true keeper of the flame is not one person, but every soul who chooses hope over fear. At the edge of the village, where the fields melted into a line of forest and the river curved like a silver ribbon, there stood an oak tree. Its trunk was wide enough that 5 men linking arms could not have circled it. Its roots ran so deep that no storm had ever toppled it, and its branches stretched like arms toward the heavens, sheltering anyone who came to rest beneath its shade. The villagers said the oak was older than the town itself. Some claimed it had seen the first settlers arrive with wagons and hopes. Others whispered it had grown from the staff of a wise wanderer who once walked these lands. Whatever its origin, the oak had always been there, quiet and steady, as generations were born and passed. Children played around its roots. Lovers carved initials into its bark, and weary farmers sat against it after long days of labor. But there was one visitor who came more often than any other, a boy named Thomas. Thomas was 12, with restless feet and eyes that always looked toward the hills beyond the village. He often wandered further than he should, returning home with scraped knees and stories of creeks, deer trails, and abandoned cabins. His mother scolded him gently, but the oak never scolded. The oak simply listened. One evening, after a day filled with questions he could not answer, Thomas came to the oak. He dropped his satchel on the ground and leaned against the trunk, staring at the fading light. "Everyone keeps telling me who I should be," he muttered. "My father wants me to work the fields. My teacher says I should study harder. My friends say I should just play and forget the rest. But what do I want? I don't even know." The oak's leaves rustled in the evening wind, a sound like an old man sighing. Thomas tilted his head back. "Sometimes I wish you could talk," he said softly. To his surprise, a voice answered, low, deep, and steady, as if it came from the earth itself. "And what would you ask, child?" Thomas jumped to his feet, his eyes wide. "Who said that?" The voice came again, warm and patient. "It is I, the one who has stood here longer than memory. The oak beneath which you sit." Thomas blinked, torn between fear and awe. You can talk." "Not to all," the oak replied. "Only to those who listen with more than their ears." Thomas's heart raced, but curiosity overcame fear. "Then, can you help me? Can you tell me what I should do with my life?" The oak was silent for a long moment. Then it spoke again. "Your life is not a road I can walk for you, but I can share what I have learned. I have seen centuries pass, seasons turn, people live and die. Their joys, their mistakes, their wisdom, they rest in my roots. If you are willing to listen, I will tell you what I know." Thomas sat down quickly, eyes shining. "Please, tell me everything." The oak's branches swayed gently, as though gathering thoughts carried on the wind. "Once it began, there was a wanderer who came to this very place. He had traveled across deserts, mountains, and seas, yet he carried no treasure, no crown. He carried only questions, much like you. He sat where you sit now, weary and uncertain, and I asked him, 'What do you seek?'" Thomas leaned forward eagerly. "What did he say?" The oak's voice deepened. "He said he sought meaning. He wanted to know why he had been given life at all. So I told him, 'Watch the river.'" "The river," Thomas echoed. "Yes, the river begins as a trickle, then gathers strength, sometimes rushing, sometimes pausing in quiet pools. It bends around stones, it carves valleys, it gives life to fields. Yet it never asks where it will end, it simply flows. And in flowing, it finds its purpose." Thomas frowned, chewing on the words. "So, are you saying I shouldn't worry where I'm going? Just live?" The oak's branches shook softly, almost like laughter. "Not just live, flow. Allow yourself to grow, to change, to bend when needed, and to keep moving when obstacles stand in your way. Purpose is not found in a single answer. It is shaped by the journey." Thomas sat quietly, the weight of those words sinking into him. The world suddenly felt larger, yet less frightening. Days passed, and Thomas returned often. Each time he brought a new question. "Why are some people cruel?" he asked one afternoon. The oak replied, "Because they are like branches cut from their roots. They forget where they came from, and without grounding, they lash out. Show them kindness, and sometimes they remember." Another day he asked, "Why do people have to die?" The oak's leaves whispered gently, "Because life is like the seasons. If there were only summer, the earth would wither. Death makes space for new life, just as autumn makes space for spring." And once he asked, "How do I know who to trust?" The oak rumbled thoughtfully. "Trust those who bring you peace, not those who bring you fear. Roots grow deep where there is steady rain, not storms." Each answer settled in Thomas's heart like seeds, though he did not yet know how they would grow. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of lavender and gold, Thomas asked, "Oak, why do you tell me these things?" "Why me?" the oak replied slowly. "Because once a wanderer asked the same questions. He listened, he learned, and before he left, he pressed his staff into the ground here, promising that wisdom should never vanish. From that staff, I grew. So I pass on what I know, as it was passed to me, and perhaps one day you will do the same." Daniel opened his eyes to the sound of rustling leaves, though the air was calm. The old oak stood over him, branches stretching wide like a guardian keeping watch. Morning light spilled through the canopy, painting the grass with shifting patterns of gold. For a moment, he simply lay there, listening. It was strange. He had never felt so rested, though he had slept on the hard earth. The oak seemed different now, alive in a way he hadn't noticed before. When the wind moved, the leaves whispered, and Daniel could almost hear words hidden in the sound. He sat up slowly, brushing the dirt from his shirt. "You stayed," a voice murmured, low and ancient, like the earth itself breathing. Daniel froze. His eyes darted around, but no one was near, only the oak, silent and unmoving. He pressed his palms against the ground, his heart hammering. "Who's there?" The voice came again, steady, patient. "You hear me because you chose to listen. Few do." Daniel's mouth went dry. The stories he had heard about the oak speaking to those who truly sought wisdom came rushing back. He swallowed hard. You're the oak. I am the keeper of many seasons," the oak replied. "And you, Daniel, are a boy searching for answers you already carry within." Daniel shivered. He didn't know if he was afraid or in awe. "I don't understand. I don't know what to do with my life. Everyone expects me to become something I'm not. I feel lost." The oak's branches creaked softly. Lost is the beginning of found. Do you know what roots feel when they first reach into the soil? Darkness, uncertainty. But they do not stop. They push deeper until they drink from hidden streams. Your path is no different. Daniel stared at the tree, his chest tightening. "But what if I fail? What if I never find the right way?" "You will fail," the oak said gently, "more than once. But failure is not the end, is the pruning that helps you grow stronger. Even I have lost branches to storms, yet still I rise." Daniel felt something stir within him, a small flicker of courage he hadn't known was there. For days, he returned to the oak, sitting beneath its shade. Each time, he heard more less like words, and more like truths carried in the rustle of leaves, in the groan of wood deep inside the trunk. He began to understand that life was not about rushing, but about growing steadily, like the tree itself. But the world beyond the meadow did not wait. In the village, Daniel's family struggled. His father's work at the mill barely fed them. His mother worried constantly about the future. And Daniel was seen as a dreamer, too soft for the world. One evening, as Daniel returned from the oak, he found his father at the table, head in his hands. "The mill is closing," his father said in a low, broken voice. "We have nothing. Soon we'll lose even this house." Daniel's stomach clenched. Fear clawed at him, but beneath it was the memory of the oak's steady voice. Failure is pruning. Growth follows. That night, he went back to the oak. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice shaking. "My family is falling apart. I can't just sit and listen. I have to act, but how?" The oak swayed, its leaves shimmering in the moonlight. "You carry more strength than you believe. You think yourself small, yet even the smallest acorn holds a forest inside. To help your family, you must first trust yourself. Seek not what is easy, but what is true." Daniel sat in silence, clutching those words. What was true for him? He had always loved fixing things, building small wooden toys, repairing tools others had thrown away. Could this be the hidden stream the oak had spoken of? The next day, he took the broken tools from his father's shed and began mending them. At first, it was slow and clumsy. His hands ached, his patience frayed, but he remembered the oak's words, "Push deeper." He kept going. Soon neighbors noticed. A farmer brought him a plow with a cracked blade. A shopkeeper asked him to repair a wooden cart. Little by little, Daniel found himself not just helping, but providing. Coins began to find their way into his family's jar. His parents looked at him differently, not as the lost boy, but as someone finding his place. Yet the shadow of doubt still lingered. One evening, the stranger returned, the wanderer who had once warned Daniel that the world was harsh and uncaring. He appeared at the edge of the meadow, leaning on a crooked staff, eyes sharp as flint. "So," the wanderer sneered, "you speak to trees now? You think whispers in the wind will feed your family, foolish boy? The world devours dreamers." Daniel's heart pounded, but he remembered the oak's voice, deep and steady. He stood tall. "Maybe, but I'd rather be a dreamer who builds than a cynic who destroys." The wanderer's eyes narrowed. For a moment, Daniel thought he might strike him. But then the man laughed a low, bitter sound and disappeared into the dark. That night, Daniel returned to the oak. "I was afraid," he confessed, "but I didn't run. I faced him." "And so you grew," the oak answered. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to stand despite it." As seasons turned, Daniel's craft blossomed. The once lost boy had become the village's craftsman, shaping not only wood and iron, but a future for his family. Yet, even as his hands built, his heart always returned to the oak. One winter evening, snow drifted gently across the meadow. Daniel stood before the oak, taller now, stronger. "I used to think being lost was the end," he said softly. "But it was the beginning, wasn't it?" The oak's branches bowed beneath the snow, whispering through the silence, "Every end is a beginning. You are not the boy who first came to me, trembling in the dark. You are the man shaped by storms, rooted by choice, and reaching now toward the sky. Remember this, when you feel uncertain again, come back to the roots. The soil will remind you who you are." Daniel placed his hand against the rough bark, warmth pulsing beneath it despite the winter cold. "Thank you," he whispered, and for the first time he realized the oak had never truly spoken aloud. The voice had always been within him, patient, steady, waiting for him to listen. As he walked back to the village, snow crunching beneath his boots, he carried the truth with him. Life is not about racing to grow faster than others. It is about planting yourself deeply, tending the soil of your heart, and trusting that in time you will rise. The old oak stood silent and proud, a sentinel in the meadow. Its branches stretched wide, sheltering the land. And though many would pass by without hearing, Daniel would always remember the whispers in the leaves, whispers that turned a lost boy into a man of purpose. Moral: even when you feel lost, your roots are quietly growing. Patience, courage, and steady effort will guide you to the life meant for you. At the farthest edge of a quiet valley town, where the hills curved like resting giants and the sky stretched wide with endless stars, there stood a crooked wooden house. Its windows glowed faintly each night, a warm amber light against the dark. Inside lived an old woman named Marin, known by the children simply as the Weaver. Her loom, carved from oak long before anyone could remember, bore symbols no one knew how to read. By day she sold simple cloth at the market shawls, scarves, blankets, yet by night her loom hummed with a strange low song, and threads of light spilled across her hands. The villagers whispered that she did not weave cloth alone, but dreams. Some laughed at the idea, calling it nothing more than stories to amuse restless children. Yet those who carried her cloth often woke lighter, calmer, as though some hidden weight had been lifted from their hearts. A widow who wrapped herself in one of Marin's shawls dreamt of her husband smiling at her from across a golden field. A farmer who slept under Marin's blanket said he dreamt of rain after months of drought, and days later the skies opened with soft, steady showers. One evening, as the town settled into silence, a boy named Elias came to her door. He carried in his hands a broken wooden toy, its paint chipped, its little wheel missing. His mother had died the winter before, and ever since, sleep for him was filled with silence, shadows, and an ache too heavy for his small chest. Marin opened the door before he could even knock, as though she had been expecting him. She did not ask questions, but guided him gently to the loom. With wrinkled fingers, she placed the toy upon its frame, and then she began to weave. Threads shimmered as they crossed beneath her hands, blue like twilight, gold like candlelight, silver like moonlit water. Elias watched with wide eyes, afraid to blink in case the colors disappeared. The cloth grew quickly, each thread drawn from the memory of laughter, the scent of bread baking in a warm kitchen, the sound of lullabies carried by the wind. When Marin lifted the fabric at last, she draped it across the boy's shoulders. He felt its warmth seep deep into him, like a hug that reached through skin and into bone. That night, Elias dreamed of his mother's voice, soft and full of joy, and he woke smiling for the first time in many months. From that moment, word spread. Farmers, widows, merchants, and weary travelers came quietly to her crooked house, each bringing something heavy with memory. A soldier returned from war with only a torn letter in his pocket. A mother carried a shoe once worn by her lost child. A lonely man offered a locket that no longer opened. To each, Marin listened without speaking much, then laid the object on her loom, drawing threads of light that matched their hidden grief and longing. The cloth she wove for them shimmered like water in moonlight, and when they wrapped themselves in it at night, their dreams softened, their wounds stitched themselves invisible, if only for a while. But not all who came sought comfort. One late evening, when the moon was a thin silver blade in the sky, a man knocked at Marin's door. He was tall, cloaked in shadows, his eyes carrying storms. He placed nothing on the loom, only stood with clenched fists. "I want a dream that will silence the past," he said, his voice brittle. Marin's eyes narrowed slightly, for every dream had a cost, and she could see the anger twisting around him like black vines. Still, she did not turn him away. She reached beneath the loom and drew out a thread unlike the others, dark, almost without color. She wove quickly, and the cloth that appeared was heavy and gray, like smoke. The man snatched it before it was finished, and left without a word. That night the villagers said they heard screams in his house, though in the morning he walked the streets with hollow, empty eyes. Marin knew then that weaving dreams was not only a gift, but also a burden. Each thread carried weight, and every dream changed the dreamer in ways both tender and terrible. Still, she continued, because for every shadow there were 10 lights restored. As the years moved gently forward, children grew into adults who carried fragments of her dreams with them. A farmer's daughter, once soothed by her cloth, became a teacher who told her students that hope was a seed you must water daily. A soldier who had come to her broken, learned to speak gently to his children, passing on not his scars, but his tenderness. Each life, touched by Marin's loom, rippled outward like circles on water. Yet Marin herself, in all her nights at the loom, never wove for her own heart. Her husband had been lost long ago, and a child she once carried had never lived long enough to cry in her arms. She buried those memories deep, never daring to thread them into cloth, for she feared the dream they might call forth. But as age pressed on her shoulders and her steps grew slower, she began to wonder if the loom was waiting for her to tell her own story at last. One spring evening, as rain tapped gently on the roof, Elias returned. Now no longer a boy, but a grown man with broad shoulders and eyes bright with kindness. He brought with him a child of his own, a little girl with braids and restless curiosity. She climbed onto Marin's lap as if she had always belonged there, and Marin felt warmth rise in her chest. Elias spoke softly. "The dream you wove for me when I was a boy never left me. It taught me that sorrow can be carried without drowning in it. I think she," he said, nodding toward his daughter, "deserves to know the same light." Marin smiled, though her eyes glistened. She guided the girl's small hand to the loom. Together they drew threads of laughter, sunshine, and the smell of blossoms after rain. The loom glowed brighter than it had in many years, as if rejoicing at the new hands guiding it. That night, the little girl dreamt of fields, endless and golden, where no shadows lingered and voices sang like bells. As Marin watched her sleep, something stirred in her chest, fragile yet insistent. For the first time in decades, she felt the loom calling her not to weave for others, but to weave for herself. The memory of her lost child rose like dawn on the horizon of her mind, and she realized the story was unfinished. Her loom, patient through the long years, seemed to whisper that it was ready to help her face the dream she had always feared. And so, as the moon rose high and the town slept quietly, Marin sat before the loom alone. She placed her wrinkled hands on its frame, took a deep breath, and for the first time in her long life, began to weave the threads of her own heart. Marin's hands trembled slightly as they rested on the loom, her breath slow and steady, the rhythm of a heart that had carried both love and loss for too many years. For so long she had poured the pain and longing of others into her cloth, stitching comfort where there was silence and hope where there was despair. Yet never once had she dared to place her own sorrow upon the frame. Now, in the hush of the night, she felt the weight of her years pressing her gently toward this final act. The first thread she drew was pale as morning light, thin yet resilient, born from the memory of her youth, when she would sing softly in her small cottage, her hands busy with baskets of herbs, waiting for her husband to return from the fields. The loom hummed low, as though recognizing the honesty in her offering. She added another thread, deep crimson, drawn from the love that once filled her days like warm firelight. Then came a thread of gray, heavy as winter fog, carrying the memory of the child she never held, whose breath was a promise broken before it began. The loom did not falter beneath the weight. Instead, it seemed to pulse with gentle understanding, drawing each thread into a tapestry unlike any she had ever woven. Colors intertwined, sorrow and joy meeting, pain and tenderness twisting into one another until they formed a whole. As she worked, tears slipped down her cheeks, not bitter, but soft, as though her body was releasing a grief that had waited decades to flow. When the cloth was finished, she lifted it with trembling arms. It shimmered not in bright silver or gold, but in muted hues, sunset pink, dawn blue, the kind of colors that belong to moments between day and night. She laid it across her shoulders and closed her eyes. The world fell away, and for the first time she stepped into a dream of her own making. She stood in a meadow where the grass swayed like waves, golden beneath a gentle sun. Ahead of her stood a man she knew at once, her husband, young and smiling, his eyes full of the warmth she had carried in memory all these years. Beside him was a small child with dark hair and a laugh that rang like bells, the child she had never held in life but had carried in her heart for eternity. The dream was not sorrowful, it was tender, a gift. They did not speak, for words were not needed. They simply stood together, the wind moving around them, and in that stillness she felt whole. When she woke, the cloth had slipped from her shoulders, lying folded neatly, as if it had tucked her into rest. She touched it gently, knowing she had finally woven her own piece. For the first time in many years, she felt no weight pressing on her chest. Instead, there was quiet, like the hush of dawn before the world stirs. From that night onward, her weaving changed. Villagers still came, bringing tokens of sorrow, but Marin no longer wove only to soothe pain. Now she wove dreams of balanced threads, of joy and grief, side by side, teaching those who sought her cloth that life was not the absence of sadness, but the weaving together of every shade, light and dark. Her cloths glowed more softly now, but lingered longer in the hearts of those who slept beneath them. Elias returned, often with his daughter, who grew into a curious young girl, always eager to guide her fingers across the loom. Marin taught her patiently, passing on not only the skill but the wisdom of listening to the quiet stories carried in every object people brought. The girl's laughter filled the crooked house, and the loom seemed to glow brighter under her touch, as if it knew its future was secure. Seasons passed gently, each leaving its mark upon the valley. Marin's hair grew whiter, her steps slower, but her spirit lighter than it had ever been. One night, as winter snow lay heavy across the roofs, she sat at the loom for the last time. She did not weave for herself, nor for the villagers, but for the child who now carried her legacy. She drew threads of starlight, threads of laughter, threads of deep stillness, and wove a cloth that shimmered with the story of all she had ever been. When it was done, she folded it carefully and placed it in the hands of Elias's daughter. "This is not just cloth," she whispered softly, her voice gentle as falling snow. "It is a reminder that dreams are not escapes, but bridges between what we long for and what we live. Carry it, and when the world feels heavy, let it remind you that even sorrow can be beautiful when woven with love." The girl hugged her tightly, and Marin smiled, feeling the warmth of a circle completed. That night, she lay down with ease, her body at rest, her heart finally free. As she closed her eyes, she felt the meadow rise once more, her husband's hand in hers, her child running ahead through fields of endless gold. She walked toward them without fear, her steps sure, her spirit light. The loom, left in the crooked wooden house, stood waiting in silence, ready for the new hands that would guide it, ready to weave new dreams for new hearts. And though the villagers would speak of Marin as the weaver who healed sorrow, those who had felt her cloth knew the truth that she had taught them not to escape their pain, but to embrace the whole tapestry of life, where every thread had its place. And so the house at the edge of the valley remained, its windows glowing softly each night, not with the light of endings, but with the eternal beginning of dreams waiting to be woven. A crooked little shop stood quietly on a cobbled street, its wooden sign swinging gently in the winter wind. Inside, the warm golden light revealed shelves lined with clocks of every kind, each one ticking softly, as though the shop itself had a heartbeat. At the center sat Elias Marin, an old clockmaker whose steady hands had guided countless gears back to life. His eyes were tired but kind, carrying decades of patience, as if he had listened not only to clocks but to the quiet stories people brought with them. One evening, when snowflakes floated lazily outside, the door opened with a soft creak. A young woman stepped in, her cheeks pink from the cold, her eyes swollen from tears. She carried in her hand a delicate locket-shaped clock, no larger than her palm. She placed it on the counter as though laying down a fragile memory. "It was my mother's," she whispered. "It stopped the night she passed away." Elias lifted the locket gently, feeling its silence. For a long moment he listened. Then, with a soft smile, he said, "Sometimes clocks stop because they wait for us, but perhaps this one is ready to begin again." He opened the case, revealing tiny wheels and springs dulled with age. With careful movements, he polished, adjusted, and replaced a single worn gear. Soon the locket gave a faint tick, hesitant but alive. The young woman gasped, tears returning, but this time of relief. She clutched it to her heart, whispering "thank you" over and over. Elias only nodded. For him, it wasn't just about fixing time. It was about mending pieces of broken hearts. Days passed, and people from the little town continued to visit. Each brought not only a clock, but a story. A fisherman brought his father's pocket watch, its face cracked from years at sea. Elias polished it. A little boy arrived with a toy clock, its hands bent and frozen. Elias repaired it and wound it until the child's laughter filled the shop like bells ringing. Each repair was more than metal, and Gearzit was hope, gently set back in motion. But Elias carried his own silence. On the top shelf of his workshop sat a clock he never touched. It was old, with a dark wooden case, and its hands were stopped forever at midnight. It belonged to his wife, long gone, and though Elias could fix the finest mechanisms, he never found the courage to touch that one. It stood as a quiet reminder that even a clockmaker could not bring back every moment he lost. One spring morning, a boy named Daniel wandered into the shop. His shoes were worn, his clothes patched, and his eyes full of questions. In his hands he carried no clock. Instead, he simply asked, "Mister, why do you fix them? They're just old clocks." Elias smiled and handed him a small watch to hold. "Listen," he said. Daniel pressed it to his ear and heard the steady tick. "That sound," Elias continued, "is a promise that time is still moving forward. And sometimes, when people are hurting, they need that reminder." The boy nodded slowly, as though hearing more than just the watch. Daniel began visiting often, helping sweep the shop, dust the shelves, and listen to Elias's gentle lessons. Over time, Elias taught him how to open cases, how to place each gear just so, how to wind springs with patience. Daniel's small hands trembled at first, but under Elias's guidance, they grew steadier. Soon, he was repairing simple clocks on his own. The shop began to echo not only with ticking, but with the quiet bond of teacher and student, each filling a silence in the other's life. One day, an old sailor arrived with a clock shaped like a ship's wheel. It was rusted, heavy, and nearly falling apart. "It's the only thing I have left from my voyages," the sailor said. Elias studied it and invited Daniel to work beside him. Together, they cleaned the gears, oiled the pivots, and polished the case until the clock shone like the sea at dawn. When it ticked again, the sailor's eyes brimmed with memories of waves, storms, and faraway stars. He left, whispering blessings to them both. Summer turned to autumn, and the shop grew busier. People carried in clocks that had belonged to parents, grandparents, even strangers whose stories lived on only through the sound of ticking. Elias and Daniel worked side by side, each repair a gentle act of kindness. But as the leaves fell, Elias began to cough more often. His hands, though steady, grew slower. Daniel noticed, and a quiet worry settled in his heart. One evening, after the shop had closed, Daniel saw Elias staring at the clock on the high shelf, the one frozen at midnight. "Why don't you fix it?" Daniel asked, softly. Elias's eyes filled with something deep and unspoken. "Some clocks." My wife's laughter, her hands setting the table. "All of it stopped with that clock, and I've been afraid. Afraid that if I open it, I'll lose what little I still feel." Daniel placed his hand gently over Elias's. "But maybe fixing it won't erase her. Maybe it will help her voice tick again in your heart." That night, Elias took the clock down. Together, they opened its case. Dust filled the air, and the gears were stiff with rust. Slowly, carefully, they worked, replacing what was broken, cleaning what was worn. As the final spring was wound, the clock gave a trembling tick, then another, until it was steady once more. Elias closed his eyes, and in that ticking he heard her laughter again, faint but alive. Tears ran down his cheeks, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. He whispered, "Thank you," to Daniel, to the shop, to the time that still remained. Winter returned, and snow once more dusted the street outside. Elias grew weaker, his cough deeper, until one morning he did not rise to open the shop. Daniel sat by his side, holding his hand, listening to the faint ticking of clocks filling the quiet room. With his last breath, Elias whispered, "Keep them ticking, Daniel. Keep the stories alive." And then, like a clock that gently winds down, he was gone. The town mourned, but the shop did not fall silent. Daniel took up the tools, his hands now steady, his heart full of lessons Elias had left behind. He repaired clocks, not only for time, but for people, carrying on the gift of hope. On the top shelf, the midnight clock still ticked softly, no longer frozen, a quiet reminder of love that even time could not erase. And so the little shop on the cobbled street continued, filled with the gentle ticking of 95 clocks, each one carrying a memory, each one whispering softly that though moments pass, love remains, steady as time itself.